بیت چنج با من بیتا میلانیان. قصه ما مهاجران.
با سلام و خوش آمد به 11مین برنامه بیت چنج با من بیتا میلانیان از رادیو ایران 670 AM KIRN. امیدوارم همه دوستانی که امروز 29 ماه نوامبر سال 2020 از هر جای دنیا که به این برنامه گوش میکنید تندرست و خوشحال باشید و اگر در آمریکا زندگی میکنید تانکسگیوینگ خوبی رو با عزیزانتون داشتید. قبل از شروع و معرفی میهمان عزیزی که امروز با ما هستن، سپاس همیشگی دارم از تیم فنی و مدیریت رادیو ایران و همه زحماتشون برای تنظیم و پخش برنامه‌ها. امروز میزبان یک بانی بسیار محترم و موفق که من افتخار آشنایی با ایشون رو دارم هستم. خانم دکتر بیتا سارا پیشور هینز، محقق روانشناس بالینی، کارآفرین، استاد دانشگاه، سخنران بین‌المللی، مربی سلامتی و تیترای ایشون بسیار زیاد هستن. به خاطر همین خلاصه میگم که خودشون توضیح بدن همه کارهای مختلفی که انجام دادن و میدن تا به امروز. ایشون امروز با ما در مورد قصه مهاجرت خودشون به آمریکا، فراز و نشیب‌های زندگیشون و چطور تونستن به این موفقیت متفاوت و چشمگیر دست پیدا کنن صحبت خواهیم کرد. صحبت من امروز با ایشون به زبان انگلیسی و فارسی خواهد بود و دوست دارم که بیوگرافی ایشون رو به طور خلاصه به زبان انگلیسی براتون اینجا بگم. At age 29, Dr. Haynes earned her PhD in clinical psychology. At 31, she completed her postdoctoral clinical training to improve health outcomes among African American and Latina communities, and then was invited to join the full-time clinical research faculty at Georgetown School of Medicine. At 35, she was a tenured professor. On the heels of setting scholastic curves at leading academic institutions Georgetown and UC Berkeley, Sarah was recruited to Silicon Valley to join a prominent venture capital firm. As chief of staff of a firm with $650 million under management, she worked directly with founders in leading the investment committees of Uber, Airbnb, Q, Curology, Doctors on Demand, Slack, and Hyperloop One. And it was in San Francisco that Dr. Haynes began leading goal-setting team-building retreats for individuals and groups seeking to maximize both professional and personal growth, and her methodology was met with resounding approval in the form of frequent repeat participants. She has supported company founders and C-suite executives, pitched billionaires and VIP investors, and collaborated with Fortune 500 CEOs and world-class athletes. At her core, however, Dr. Haynes is one who seeks to contribute and to evaluate society by way of supporting diversity and inclusion. Social corporate responsibility is a foundation of every company she launches and with which she aligns. And it is why for every hour she devotes to coaching clientele of the collective, she donates an equal hour of time to coaching with nonprofit organizations. Dr. Haynes, it's a wonderful pleasure to have you here as my guest on Be the Change. How are you doing today?
I am doing fantastic, and I'm so honored and deeply privileged to be here today with you and this incredible community that is following you and inspired by the work that you're doing. Thank you.
Thank you. I know it's Thanksgiving holiday weekend. You could have been with friends and loved ones, but you made time to be here to tell us all about your journey, your life journey as an immigrant, as a successful businesswoman, as a mother of two, wonderful wife to your husband, and a great daughter to your family. So thank you for making that time today. So let's just jump right into it. You know, you're an Iranian American, you're proud of your roots, your family, you know, is super successful, yet you guys are super humble at the same time. Many in the Iranian community may not know you guys as much because you guys are not necessarily in Los Angeles as much. So maybe the community hasn't met most of you, but yet you guys have had such an impact, not just within the Iranian American community giving back, but also globally. So let's rewind to the beginning of times when the Pishevar family immigrated to the US and how it all happened. Take us through that journey, please.
Sure, absolutely. I would be honored to. I think the first thing I want to say is that, you said that I would have time with my family and friends during Thanksgiving, and this is actually an extension of that, to be here with you and the Iranian community and living by our values to make sure that the next generation also hears this interview and learns from this is actually part and parcel to our family values, to ensure that the next generation and the foundation that we built is able to take and benefit from it, but also give back to the community, so that we're always continuously growing and continuing the full cycle of the gifts and privileges that we've worked hard to get.
Absolutely.
I'll start with that. I think one of the main things that's really important to distinguish is that the people that were in Iran during the revolution, which included myself and my family, we were there in 1979 and had to escape. And so we've lived a life of privilege in many ways. My parents, my father, I'll start with him, are such a huge influence on the decisions that were made for our family and the values in which they have worked hard and the sacrifices they've made for us. And so he was my father, Abraham Pishevar, actually is Dr. Abraham Pishevar. He finished his PhD at 55 after coming to the United States and teaching us how important it is to continue education, which is the number one, value that was imparted to us. He was himself an orphan. At age 5, he lost his mother. At age 11, he lost his father, and was raised by his aunt, Bibi, which is my nickname. It happens to be. But she was a woman who had physical disabilities, was blind, and raised my father, who was very precocious and very bright. And he would basically save up his pennies by taking driftwood from Anzali in the waters to sell those, to be able to have money to rent books overnight. And his stepmother would turn off the oil gases so he wouldn't be able to read. And he was really precocious, so he would try to read overnight to return those books so that he can continuously read. So that was a value that has been shared with us of knowledge. It's such an important value for us, and continues to learn through books, through knowledge seeking and knowledge sharing. So that's the foundation that I wanted to start with, is that we really did come from a country where you needed to have connections, and parti bazi as it was, to get anywhere. He left Bandar Anzali to Tehran, and my mom's family is from Tabriz. They left Tabriz to come to Tehran as well. So we have the Azeri constituents, I think, here representing.
Both Azeri, and of course we can't discount the first name here. So
exactly, and Bita Square. So
that's right.
We got double power.
That's right.
So we have a lot in common in terms of the immigrant story of coming and understanding where our family history comes from. Is really important from a psychological perspective, which is where my PhD is. My background is to know the family history and family ancestry, and how we live on the shoulders of the many people that have helped us to be able to have the courage to be able to fight some of the disenfranchisements that we've had to do in immigrating and leaving and learning new languages and adapting to new cultures. My mom was an educator. She was a teacher. She was a huge influence in my life and why I became a professor. We used to have, the maids and the housekeepers, where many of them were illiterate. And so she would take them under their wings and teach them, especially the women, and teach them to read and write. And so I'm really proud of my mom. And I get emotional because I think the feminist movement paid such a big impact on making sure that whatever I do in my life, that I give back to women and underserved populations, so that we ensure that we not just make it to a certain level, but to look back and say, what allowed us to get there, and what are the strengths that allowed us to fight through all of the disenfranchisements and unfairness in the world. But there are many people that helped us, and so I want to focus on that, as well as relationship building and the importance of not being a victim, and having a positive mindset. I think is something that you and I have shared in the commonalities of what makes someone gritty and having grit, which is Angela Duckworth's work. I would strongly recommend everyone to follow up and read her work on positive psychology, and what it takes to be gritty. Have grit is really about resilience. And
yes,
as a psychologist, I've worked with a lot of people who've been through trauma. And what I love about that work is working with the people that are able to go through such incredible adversity, but look at it in a place of strength building and a foundation of knowing what has helped you survive that.
and not be the victim of what happened to you rather than the hero of it.
100%. And and it's not to have toxic positivity too and be like, cheerleaders, go, everything's
No,
great.
no,
But
absolutely.
it's about really having trying to focus on the good people and the relationships that are long term. And one of the things I learned, and then this will be a thread through our conversations that I hope to impart, is I really want people to, especially millennials, especially the Iranian populations, to learn about the idea of networking, the idea of connections is really an important one that I can't speak enough to. And it's not that, and you have to be super careful because the way it's done is really dangerous and poor, and poorly done is the way that most people do in conferences, or when they meet you at a mehmoni, they get your phone number and they start texting you asking for favors, and it's like, okay, wait, what?
Yeah.
I don't really know you yet to be able to know how I can best help. So it's really important, to add value, to find win-win situations, to figure out how can you help the other person first before you ask for something, and to look at long-term relationships and this idea of transactional relationships. I saw a lot in Silicon Valley where people are talking to you, eye to eye, and all of a sudden somebody else more important comes behind your shoulder and they're looking over your shoulder. They're not talking to you anymore. They're like distracted and trying to finish up the conversation to get to the next person.
You and I met through networking, and it was so natural and so organic the way it happened, and we've nurtured this professional connection that we have on a personal level, but we've also been able, I'm using this as an example, we've also been able to keep the professional elements of it in place. And it's been a few, actually I think almost a year since we met, and I consider us a great model for this, what you just described as far as networking. It hasn't been a one-way street. It's been both of us trying to empower each other and try to see how we can learn from each other in this past year. So it's wonderful that you bring that up in this conversation.
And I'm sorry, just to add to that, I think that's such an important piece of the success of most people that I've seen is the long-term relationships have to be genuine and authentic. And I can't speak more, that's such an important aspect of one's success, I think.
Very true. Okay, so fast forward, you are here now settled in America, in Washington, D.C. with your family, and your father is, restarting life for you guys over again, but you're still young children, you and your brothers. So tell me about that experience and going to school here in America, and then graduating at 29 with your PhD in clinical psychology, and then how you moved on from that into other sectors. So tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, I think one of the things of being an immigrant family and knowing how much financial stress they have economically to make it. My mom had to work in the hotel rooms and in the laundry department, folding towels and that kind of thing. And my dad was, driving a taxi cab when he was the head of radio and television. And so, yeah, we had to learn, to keep in check our egos and our pride in a way that is about the work ethic of the value system that we had. And my dad was really influential in empowering me as a woman because I have two brothers, and he treated me the same as my brothers in many ways in terms of being able to work and driving and going to school and educational opportunities and being on sports teams. I played volleyball and basketball and soccer. I was on the varsity volleyball team. I ended up being, an athletic trainer at University of Maryland, student athletic trainer at University of Maryland with athletes. So I was very much socialized around men. And and that really influenced my ability to see and see people as allies. And I've had many incredible mentors along the way. Having two brothers has really influenced that, and being around women athletes, I think, also is really great because there's less drama than most teenage years. You're dealing with a lot of female drama, and one of the things that you touched on, I think, is important as women, is to make sure that we're being good role models about how we help each other instead of backstabbing or trying to do anything negative. But I think that that's really where my values came in. I worked since I was 13 years old. I had my own little newspaper route. As soon as I could, make some money, I felt there was so much pressure on my parents financially that, and part of the beauty of what my dad would do is he would, when he went to ride, do the taxi driving, he would come home and give us the cash. Each of us would take turns and had this little like must bag, like yogurt bag, and we would keep the money in there and we would count it, and we had a little like notebook in there, and we'd keep track of all the money. And he would come home with $50, and we're like, "Oh my God, that's a lot of money!" And one day he'd come home.
You
with
were his
100.
business manager.
Yeah. So he taught us the value of money. That he would go out all day, 12 hours, and driving in DC is not easy. And back then, like DC was not where it is today. Like 14th Street and all those areas were not.
Sketchy areas. Yeah.
So he came home one day and basically had. Didn't have any money for us to put in the bag, and that was not like him. He doesn't gamble, he doesn't drink, he doesn't. There's none of that. And so we were like, "What happened?" And he's like, "Nothing. It was just a bad day. The weather was bad." And we noticed his clothes were all disheveled and torn. So we surmised that he was, held up and beaten up. And so I say that because part of the, the journey of being a child and, having to grow up quickly about financial matters and the risks that they took for us to be able to have a stable life and live in the same buildings that we did before to have stability is such an important part of that, the Life is Beautiful model of the movie, where you, as a parent, you kind of dance and try to pretend like things are good, but at the same time, it's important for kids to understand the sacrifices that they've made for you to be able to have the privileges and opportunities in the United States. So that's a big part of our immigrant story, is seeing my parents sacrifice so much. And
so where did you end up going to school, Dr. Haynes?
So I went to University of Maryland. I was a terrapin. And that's also important to note because I was running my parents' family business. We had a nail salon that my mom got into doing nails after the hotel business, which is so really cool. It was, but it's still like not the best having to do pedicures and cleaning people's feet and that kind of thing. So it's always taught me to kind of always respect people in any class and treat them with respect, because you never know where people are coming from, and everyone's human and has a need for respect. And so I waited on tables. I worked 3 jobs. I was an NIH fellow, a fellow in NIH in Kensington, Bethesda, Maryland. And so I was able to get that IRTA fellowship because one of my clients, I was doing nails helping my parents in Rockville, and she realized I was trying to get my PhD, and I was a psychology major, and she said, there's this program for women, minorities at NIH. You might want to apply to it. So I applied and I got it. And
power of networking, right there. So and then by 35, you were already a professor.
Yeah.
How did that work? Well, what were you teaching? Were you teaching at Georgetown?
So I applied for graduate school right from undergrad. So it was a 5-year program to get my PhD. So I came to South Florida, did my training at the University of Miami with children, and I worked in multidisciplinary teams there, which is really important of where we are today with Dr. Haynes Collective. Is I've always worked in medical schools with multidisciplinary teams, and that helped me learn through a lens from different perspectives, from an audiologist, from a social worker's perspective, from all the different teams, to be able to look at a problem and come up with solutions very quickly. So I've learned to always bring in, even in my business, always bring all the disciplines and departments together, because that's really an important way of getting things solved very quickly. So I went from undergrad to graduate school very quickly. So I finished my PhD when I was 29. I was doing my internship in New Mexico, Albuquerque, New Mexico, where I met my husband, who was also doing his residency in medicine. So he's the real doctor. I'm the PhD in the family. So he was an electrical engineer for undergrad. And so I told my dad, you know, you win the lottery, you got the engineer and the doctor in one guy.
That's right.
He can write your prescriptions all the time.
Check, yeah.
So anyway, and then he went and got his MBA from Wharton after we had children. So he has a business background as well. So he's part of the collective experts as well. And I think that's part of, the family history. He's African American. He's from New Orleans, so my children are biracial. And I'm very proud of my beautiful boys. And you know, I think that is part and parcel of our value system also, is making sure when I went to New Mexico, I wanted to work with Native Americans. I was a cross-cultural psychologist. Mm-hmm. And wanted to focus on learn about different cultures, Latino cultures. I worked on as well in Washington, D.C. I did a postdoctoral fellowship after my internship in New Mexico. And I've shifted many times since then, but I've always worked on prevention, and that's
beautiful. So we're going to take a quick break, and we're going to talk about that next intervention in your career and how you went into the business world and applying all the experience you had gained in the corporate world and becoming a venture capitalist and all that stuff, and then where you are today. So we'll be right back. دوستان به برنامه بیده چنج خوش آمدید. امروز با مهمان عزیزمون دکتر بیتا سارا هین صحبت میکنم. داشتیم تا الان در مورد سالهای اول مهاجرتشون به آمریکا و تحصیلاتشون صحبت میکردیم و زندگی خصوصیشون، همسرشون، بچه‌هاشون، و حالا میخوایم ادامه بدیم صحبتمون رو در مورد رفتنشون به قسمت بعدی کاریشون و امروز در چه کجاها هستن. Dr. Haynes, welcome back to the program.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
So in the first segment, we talked about your, immigrant journey, all the challenges your parents went through, your early days of being a young immigrant, your incredible accomplishments in a short time academically, and what you worked in the academic world. And then in the next phase of your career, you're working in Silicon Valley, working with CEOs and C-suite executives, and you yourself became a CEO, female CEO of a startup, and so many other accomplishments. So how did you make that shift, and how did that whole transformation came about? Because I think it's important, especially for younger generation, to hear and see that you don't have to be kind of cookie cutter in one and be stuck, quote unquote, in one career. You can indeed, have those shifts and reinvent yourself, even, as you get older. So there's nothing wrong with that, as long as, you keep pushing forward and use those experiences. That's how I see it. So tell us how you did that.
Absolutely. Thank you for that question. I have that question posed to me a lot because,
I'm sure.
And I think one of the things that's really important to note is that when people ask that, there's twofold. It's either they're curious to know how you did it because they're, so unorthodox and unconventional to go from a PhD in clinical psychology to venture capital. It's a big jump. And I knew that when I went in, and I had a lot of imposter syndrome myself, but I think part of whenever you do something new, and I want to make sure everyone knows this, is that when you do something new, you're pushing and challenging yourself to grow and learn something new, lexicon, new words, new terminology. But ultimately, clinical psychology is about human behavior, human motivation. And when you look in the business world, everything in the economic world, from the stock exchange, it's all about psychology and psychology of fear, psychology of being able to mitigate the data that you have as a researcher, as a clinical researcher at NIH. I was responsible for 5 different hospitals trying to reduce infant mortality in African American women. But what I learned there was managing the teams, following a protocol, doing research. When if I didn't know the answers, I would research it. As soon as I received my PhD, I realized how much I did not know. So if you always have that idea that it's okay not to know everything, your title doesn't mean you're supposed to be an expert in every area. And that's why I always try to find experts to fill in, because there's no way that I can know everything. And the most dangerous thing is when you think you know everything, right? And you don't
Absolutely.
ask questions, you can actually do more harm. So that's I think the nuggets of, information I hope people realize is that I've always been open to opportunities. I've always thought of myself as someone who can adapt to different situations. Certainly because of my immigrant background, I've had to adapt. But also, there's so many things I want to learn. When I chose clinical psychology, I wanted to do the highest level of flexibility that then in clinical psychology you can start your own practice, you can do research, you can teach, you can have the world open to you. But if you do something more like research, experimental psychology, you can't do all those things. So I always wanted to have options. I love options. And so that's been my thesis, is everything I do is I try to do at the highest level so that I can trickle down and adapt to whatever my needs were. So I became a college professor. I did my fellowship, a postdoctoral fellowship at Georgetown, and I finished my clinical hours to get my licensure at Georgetown. And then they invited me to be on the faculty at Georgetown School of Medicine. And that was a huge honor. From there, I was noticed and was being recruited to do research for venture capital firms that were interested in healthcare and wellness and medical devices and things of that nature, because doing research applies to everything, right? Being a good researcher, you're able to find information and be a critical thinker. And that's another thesis that it's really important for everyone to know. Being a critical thinker means that you're taking information without your own biases and your own emotions, so that you can absorb information, analyze it, and make sense of it, and then be able to make an informed decision on which side makes the most sense based on data, not based on emotions, not based on political beliefs. I grew up in Washington, D.C. I grew up with people on the right and left. I never ever felt that there was a huge divide, because I wanted to learn what each side and what their values were. So that I've always come in with that curiosity everywhere I went. But there's a lot of politics in academia, and there's a lot of competition in academia to become a tenured professor. And I went through all of those challenges and became a tenured professor. I was at St. Petersburg College. I was 35 when I became a tenured professor. And the reason why I did the educational route, it really, I wanted to give back, but also I wanted to challenge myself. I didn't like to speak in public. I was really fearful of speaking in public. And I thought, if I'm teaching something I already know, then it's much more comfortable for me. So why not teach psychology? Because that's what I know. So I taught taught general psychology, abnormal psychology, and developmental psychology. And with that, I started, instead of giving people papers just to do random papers that they'll never see again, I started the whole goal setting protocol that I have now at the Dr. Haynes Collective by assigning the students to set a goal for themselves that was related to either personal finances, personal health and wellness, or relationship, which are the 5 pillars of Dr. Haynes Collective now, all rooted 20 years ago when I was doing my, as a college professor. That was their term paper. So they would spend the whole semester improving themselves. So at the end of it, they were able to apply that. All right, so now fast forward, we're in Silicon Valley. I was recruited to be chief of staff for a venture capital firm that was $650 million under their management. And their thesis was really early startups. They were the first ones to invest in Slack and Uber and Airbnb. All of those came in 2008 kind of crisis. So they got in very early in those times with these new innovative companies. So my role as chief of staff was not only to work with the founders to help them be able to set their goals and to make good decisions based on due diligence of the companies. And really, when venture capital firms are investing in a company, they're investing in the founders, not just the idea, right? And so the founders are so important because they make or break the company. So having the knowledge of being able to quickly assess human behavior, human motivation, and find where their strengths and weaknesses lie, I was able to help them prepare for, pitches to Apple with Tim Cook. I was in the room where it happened, as Hamilton would say, to help them prepare for those pitches. And so I've seen and heard and been in the rooms where these amazing, talented people have been looking at innovative ideas to invest in and know how to pitch things in a way that is important to kind of find the matches with the goals of the company as well. So that's part of the venture capital firm, but also working with investors. You have to be able to fundraise and be able to allow people to know why you believe in the company, why you believe in the founders and the business model. So I learned a lot from amazing people like Shervin Pishevar, and the folks at Uber, the folks at Q Mobility, the folks at Airbnb, all those founders I worked with closely. And there's a lot of common threads with those individuals as well. And it's the main thing I would say is making sure that you always follow up and you follow through with what you say you're going to do is a really important underpinning value.
I think having the discipline, being a disciplined individual, and like you said, we see a lot of times people not succeeding because they're not sticking to their goals or really having the commitment, whether it's in your personal life or in your professional life. I'm asked this question personally all the time. What is, how is it that you do so many things, and what you do, it's because first of all, you have to have passion. Second of all, you have to have commitment. Third of all, you have to have discipline. I think those three, if you agree with that, I think is so important. That's how some business leaders fail and some succeed extremely, because of the fact that they follow through and they set their goals, and they actually do what they intend to do, and they don't just talk about it.
Absolutely. And if successful people, they actually don't talk about it until they're ready to execute.
Exactly.
Right? And so I think that's one of the main things. I agree with you 100%. And part of the importance is when you do set goals is to remember that it's about your values. If you forget about why you're doing why you're doing it, it's really easy when things get tough and you're tired, and you don't want to get out of bed, or you don't want to stay up anymore. You want to go to bed. Like last night, we were up till midnight. I was driving back and forth and trying to get the interview to happen. Right? When you commit to something, you work at it, and you have a positive attitude. We didn't get frustrated. Those are the things that made it a positive culture.
You push through the challenge, you push through the process, and you don't just give up.
Absolutely. And you rally, right? You have to dig deep. And that's what I learned as an athlete. I love to hire athletes. I love to hire veterans, because they have to dig deep. And they're putting their all into it. And part of working with Usain Bolt and learning that these people who are successful and 8-time gold medalists, they still have coaches. They still have people that are helping them, guide them. So there's no ever end where these successful people are like, I know everything. I have it all. I don't need any help. Right. And as women, we don't ask for help enough. Right. We take on more and more on our shoulders, but it's also important for self-care and balance.
Which brings it to another point that I wanted to talk to you about. I met you as the CEO of Bolt, and you chose at some, a few months into the role, or maybe over a year, to step down to care for your family, to be there for your family, which then had a silver lining to be where you are today, because it allowed you to take time for you to reinvent yourself. So talk a little bit about being a female CEO in a tech company. I have I've been in tech for over 4 years, so I know what it means to be a female CEO in that industry. And the fact that you made the conscious choice to step down and take care of matters within family, which again, as a woman, one tends to be more geared towards to making that decision versus the father in the family, even though your husband is, both of us lucked out on the husband department who are super supportive and super encouraging. So let's touch on that part of your life, which is the most recent part, and then where you are today with Dr. Haynes Collective.
Yeah, everything you said was absolutely on point. And the only correction I will make is that when you're a founder of a company, you have to know when to step up and
Mm-hmm.
step aside so that somebody who is more seasoned that knows can take the company to the next level. I never intended to be the CEO forever. So I went in, the investors wanted a female CEO in that role, and I was the I was a founder and chairwoman, and they wanted me to be there. And so I said, if that's what the best thing is for the company, then I'll step into that role. And whenever you find someone that's even more qualified than me, then absolutely, that's my
Mm-hmm.
mindset always. What's the best interest for the group? And that's why the collective idea is so important. And as Americans, it's very focused on individualism and independence, and I value that. But at the same time, it's important to go back to our roots of collectivist cultures where we need each other to support. And COVID taught us that more than anything, that it's important. We can't do this alone, and
Mm-hmm.
that we need to be able to bring in other people to elevate and take the company to the next level and bring in more funding or whatever their strengths are. So yeah, um, I have had this dream to was an executive coach in Silicon Valley. I did retreats for executive women 3 years in a row, and honed in my Dr. Haynes collective methodology based on the work I did as a college professor with my students. 200 students every semester wrote these personal development essays, and then I use them in my businesses with my team as well, so they could set their goals instead of doing like annual reviews where you set some goals and then you don't look at it for a year and you come back and like, oh, how did you do? And you're like, wait, I don't know. I didn't really measure it. I don't have any scientific data. I don't have any kind of milestones that I set. So I have this whole protocol that I walk through, very customized with the methodology of Dr. Haynes Collective, to look at your unique strengths, look at your areas of obstacles, look at your anticipated workarounds. When people are optimistic, they don't think about what's around the corner. So as a chief of staff, my role was to look at risk and liability. I was the head of threat assessment at the colleges. I always look to see what the risks are, what are the liabilities. So that's where my clinical psychology lens also comes in, is where I've seen all the trauma and I've seen all the hurt. It's like, how can I
Mm-hmm.
anticipate
Mm-hmm.
problems before they happen? And people will hire you because you can solve problems and see things around the corner before others do. Not to be,
Mm-hmm.
negative Nancy or bring down the visionaries' ideas, but
Mm-hmm.
to look ahead, a few steps ahead to anticipate what might become an obstacle. And that's
Yep.
the key to success.
These are all great insights in very short time frame about this vast, extensive experience you've had in, I mean, you still got another 50 years to go to really accomplish so much more. I'm expecting that of you at this stage with all that you've already accomplished. And, I see that your boys are so involved with what you do and what your family does with their uncles and everybody else and their father. So it's so lovely to see that you're continuing as a family to nourish and guide the children in your family to be the next generation of change makers that your family has been despite all the hardship. So, and today you have created Dr. Haynes Collective, which I've been watching you kind of build on this over the past year, and truly taking your time to develop the mission and the strategy and the vision and what it is that you're trying to accomplish with it. So if you had to wrap up this conversation that would love to take on longer, but unfortunately we can't due to our limited time, how would you explain what Dr. Haynes Collective stands for, and how can it benefit everybody who may become a part of it or take advantage of the services it has to offer?
Absolutely. So our mission is basically to provide online marketplace for multidisciplinary experts who come from diverse backgrounds and offer coaching as a service, and employ our DHC methodology that I've developed, that's science-based, database, value-driven, proven methodology that empowers groups and individuals to be able to optimize productivity and balance across all the 5 different disciplines, pillars of the DHC, pillars of growth, which is growth, career and financials, number 1. Number 2 is leadership and personal evolution. Number 3 is health and wellness. 4 is family intimacy. And 5 is community and network. And that's our vision, is to really find a collaborative way of bringing in vetted experts. When my children had health issues, I'm a very knowledgeable person. I'm a researcher. I had such a hard time finding professionals that I trusted with my family. And so I brought in a multidisciplinary team of healthcare workers or business individual backgrounds. And I'm showcasing women and underrepresented minorities as well, because that's an important value, to show that there's many, many talented individuals that are performing at the highest level, and that we all need coaches to get to the next level. What you've done to get to this level is fantastic, but to be able to elevate your game, you need to learn from people who have either done that or have access to people who have done that. So that's why I'm hoping to serve as a conduit to help people achieve their goals.
That's wonderful, and so needed, and it's so important to go to sources for coaching and guidance that who have been there, done that, and are like-minded. So I'm looking forward to learning more about people that are joining your network. It's certainly been a pleasure to get to know you, learn from you, and just to continue giving back and being a differentiator in this ever-changing global community we're living in, and where we need to adapt and grow and prosper more than ever before to build the foundation and continue nourishing this beautiful world we live in for the next generation. So thank you. Thanks to your family for doing that. And thank you again for being part of Be the Change today.
Thank you so much, Bita, for having me. And it's an honor, and look forward to continuing the conversation.
Same here. Have a great rest of the day.
Thank you. You too. Thank you for having me.